Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for being here this beautiful morning. My name is Dean Francis Alfar, and I'll be moderating this event. But before all that, I'd like you to know that if you need an audio device that simultaneously translates into German, it's available. You just need to avail of it right over there. Okay? So this panel is called The Haunting of the Regions, and we have three very special speakers that I'll be introducing now. First off, we have to my right Genevieve L. Asenjo. She is an award-winning multilingual Filipino poet, novelist, fictionist, essayist, translator, children's book author, and literary scholar. She writes in Kiniraya, Iligaynon, and Filipino, and is recognized for her mentorship, cultural volunteerism, and storytelling. Featured in the Cultural Center of the Philippines Encyclopedia of Philippine Art, her work engages with urgent themes of inter-island migration, diaspora, women's lives, indigenous knowledge, and the environmental crisis of rivers, food, and mountains. Her fiction and essays also contribute to the emerging Filipino Gothic or Archipelagothic, rooted in folklore, colonial hauntings, and global trauma. Currently, she is developing keyword genealogies, a literary linguistic study of river vocabularies in her mother tongue. This is Jen. Over here in the center, we have Ian Rosales Casocot. He is a fictionist and teaches film, literature, and creative writing at Silliman University in Dumaguete City in the Philippines. He has won several Palanca Awards for his fiction, plays, and children's poetry. He was a writer-in-residence for the International Writers Program of the University of Iowa in the U.S. in 2010. He has produced the film documentary City of Literature, directed by Chinese filmmaker Zhao Louis Liu. He is profiled in the literature volume of the Cultural Center of the Philippines Encyclopedia of Philippine Arts. This is Ian. And our handsome gentleman directly across from me is Darwin Absari. He is an assistant professor and college secretary at the UP Institute of Islamic Studies, and he teaches Islamic thought, legacies of Islamic civilization and moral arts, history, society, and culture. His other research interests include pre-Hispanic Philippine history, Islam in Southeast Asia, and many others. His book, Pagtuhan, The Tausug Spiritual Tradition, was published in 2021 and was selected as a finalist for the Best Book in Spirituality and Theology during the 40th National Book Awards, which I chair. So, this is Darwin. So, I am the last person you want to hear from, so I'm going to turn over to Genevieve.
Hello. Good morning. Thank you for being here. The Haunting of the Regions, Archipelagothic Reckonings from the Western Visayas region in the Philippines. Imperial Manila remains haunted by its failure to look closely, to look at the arts and culture, the literature, and the languages of the regions that sustain it. The center still behaves as if imagination comes from elsewhere. At the heart of the archipelago, the Western Visayas has long been the country's mirror and conscience. The 20th century alone produced national artist Ramon Muzones, and from Central Visayas, Rizal Mujares, and a constellation of writers such as Magdalena Halandone, whose serialized novels and love stories were read weekly in popular magazines and performed on radio dramas across the Visayas since the post-war period in the 1950s. Generations of readers, workers, and homemakers were shaped by these voices. They made literature part of the everyday, proof that the region has always been central to the nation's cultural life, even when the capital refused to see it. Here, literature continues to reckon with the ghosts of the hacienda, the violence of land and migration, and the persistent survival of those who labor and live. Vicente Groyon writes in The Sky Over Dimas, "Sugar was evil. Sugar perpetuated the feudal system and oppressed thousands of dumaan and sakada. it could not continue to exist. That sentence reads like a national indictment. Sugar made the island rich, but also haunted. This is where Philippine modernity begins to understand itself through the Gothic. The hacienda is both setting and system, a miniature of the nation's contradictions, wealth built on servitude, faith built on hunger, progress that breeds disposition. In Rosario Cruz Lucero's collection of stories, Feast and Famine, and La India or Island of the Disappeared, the Gothic is rewritten as resistance. Her friars and women inhabit a landscape where colonial and local spirits coexist. The grotesque and the divine share the same vocabulary. Lucero's humor and myth-making mark what I call an archipelagothic of rebellion, the insistence that even in horror, there is agency. Vicente Grollon's The Sky Over Dimas brings the hacienda into modern times. Its ghosts are psychological, its wealth already decayed. The sacada is gone, but his absence stains every room, every memory. Grollon's Gothic is domestic, haunting as the cause of privilege and silence as complicity. Caroline Howe's Tiempo Muerto links the local and global. The sacada becomes the OFW or the overseas Filipino workers. The hacienda, the neoliberal nation. Here women's characters organize, write, migrate, and return, enacting what I call an archipelagothic of action, where the ghosts of history become labor, resistance, and care. The Sakada, the Tumandok, and the overseas Filipino workers form a continuum of displacement and survival. They are local and global at once, archipelagic beings whose movements shape the nation. The Sakada, or the Hacienda seasonal workers, sailing each harvest from the island of Panay to Negros, is the earliest migrant laborer of the archipelago. His body fuels the sugar industry. His crossings sustain inter-island economies. He is the archipelagothic ferryman. His labor, the bridge between islands, classes, and centuries. The Tumandok, the indigenous people of Panay, are the keepers of the first stories. Their cosmology imagines rivers and mountains as kin. Their resistance to the Halaor Dam continues the unfinished revolution for land. They remind us that haunting is not about ghosts, but about continuity, that to remember the dead is to guard the living's right to home. The overseas Filipino worker extends this haunting globally. The Sakada becomes seafarer, nurse, domestic worker, carrying Visayan vowels and island songs across continents. Their remittances sustain the nation. Their absence reshapes family, faith, and love. They are the archipelagos living diaspora, proof that our stories are both national and planetary. Leoncio Derriada, my mentor, built the intellectual foundation for this plural imagination in the island. From the 1980s to his death in 2019, he encouraged the resurgence of writings in the vernacular. In my home island alone, we write and speak in Kinaraya, Akyanon, Hiligaynon, or Visayan-laced Filipino, considered to be the national language, and English, proving that Philippine literature has never been monolingual. Derriada's advocacy for regional writing transformed classrooms and literary contests, showing that the nation's literary corpus is archipelagic, interconnected, multilingual, multi-genre. Alistan Gonzalez, another mentor, writing in Hiligaynon, continues this ethos. Her fiction centers women in small towns and cities caught between domestic labor, devotion, and migration. Through her, the vernacular becomes international, her characters echoing both Sakadas and the overseas Filipino workers in their endurance. Around them, the Western Visayas literary scene thrives. Poets, fictionists, essayists, playwrights, and filmmakers working in Kinaraya, Hiligaynon, Filipino, and English. The 10-volume Panay Epics published by UP Press, available there, preserve the oral Sugidanon tradition. Independent publishers like Kasing-Kasing Press and digital platforms such as My Balay Sugidanon or the House of Storytelling create a living infrastructure for regional voices. Book fairs, workshops, privately sponsored contests, and the region's strong record in national awards show that the periphery is not peripheral, it is productive. In Lumbay ng Dila, The Sorrow of the Tongue, my first novel, speaks across languages, no, is both bridge and burden. The novel's protagonists speak in Kinaraya, Hiligaynon, Filipino, and English, reflective of the archipelago itself, shifting, relational, and finished. The characters live between islands and idioms, haunted by language as they are by love. This is the archipelagotic of the tongue, to grieve through words that do not always belong to you, and to find in that grief a shared articulation of the archipelago's condition. In my recent book, Ang Itim na Orchids ng Isla Boracay, the Gothic becomes ecological. The black orchid blooms from the ruins of tourism. The island itself becomes a ghost of paradise. The new sacadas are the waiters, cleaners, and boatmen who serve in the cycle of endless arrival and erasure. The archipelagothic here is extractive modernity, beauty built on exhaustion, and resilience mistaken for infinite hospitality. Yet the sea in both novels, in both works, is witness and archive. It connects Boracay's tide to Panay's rivers and Negros fields, to Manila's ports, and to Filipino bodies scattered worldwide. To write these stories is to map connection, to show that our islands, our languages, and our labor are bound by the same current. The seas of the Western Visayas do not isolate us from Manila. They connect us. Every ferry that leaves Iloilo or Bacolod carries not only goods, but words, stories, memories, ghosts. Our sakadas, tumanduks, and OFWs are not side notes in the nation's narrative. They are its recurring protagonists. Their journeys across islands, across continents, show that haunting can be a mode of relation, a way to remember the cause of forgetting, and to insist that the regions and the nation remain in dialogue. The haunting of the regions then is not tragedy, it is continuity. It is how the archipelago thrives through relation, destabilizing the idea of a single center and showing instead how the sea connects, sustains, and redefines us. In this archipelagic thinking, the region is not the other of the nation. It is the nation's living heart, where stories, language, and islands keep the country whole. Thank you.
Okay, slide. Hello, my name is Ian. I am primarily a writer of short stories, and my talk is about. Can we go to the next slide? Anyway, the title of my talk is Uncovering the Folk Literature in Negros Oriental. That's the province where I am from. But primarily, if this topic is about the haunting of the regions, my topic is really about the haunting of marginalization. Okay? I actually come here as a bit of an outlier because unlike my colleagues like Genevieve here writes in Hiligaynon and Kiniraya, Darwin writes in Tausog, I am actually primarily a writer in English. I write in my own regional language, which is Binisaya, sometimes called Cebuano, but I actually write primarily in English, although I have written some poems and some essays in Binisaya. But even though I write primarily in English, I am still very much a regional writer. Someone who writes in the periphery of what we usually call Imperial Manila. Okay, and here's the representation of that. Okay, and there's a reason why I write in English. So next slide. The reason why I write English is because I live in this particular town. This is Dumaguete City. That's the capital of Negros Oriental, my province. And Dumaguete is very peculiar over the fact that it actually hosts the first American university in my country, which is Silliman University. And with Silliman University, actually, they propagated the writing in English, and that is why many of the writers who come from Dumaguete write primarily in English rather than in Binisaya. So that's the reason why I write in English primarily, because of Silliman University, the biggest school in my hometown. Okay, so that's Dumaguete at night, very beautiful. The mountains are there, and it's also beside the sea. If you want to go to the mountains, that's like 20 minutes away. If you want to go to the beach, that's also 20 minutes away. So everything is perfect and homey in my hometown. So next slide, please. I would like to talk a little bit about the language of the Visayas because, like I said, I write in Cebuano. Okay, so the Cebuano-speaking regions of the Visayas is primarily Negros Oriental over there, and Cebu and Bohol and Siquijor. To the left side, we have Aquianon, Kiniraya, and Hiligaynon. That's where Genevieve comes from. Okay, that's the red island. That's Panay. Okay, that's her island. And the eastern part of that boot-looking island, okay, the western part is Negros Occidental. They also speak in Hiligaynon and write in Hiligaynon. But the eastern side, we actually write in Binisaya or Cebuano, together with that island in the center, the long strip, that's Cebu, and that blue, I don't know, circle over there, that's Bohol. They also write in Cebuano. To the eastern side, those people write and speak in Waray. Although there are districts there are provinces that also write in Cebuano. So in Visayas, we actually have 5 languages: Cebuano, Waray, Akianon, Kiniraya, and Hiligaynon. It's a very rich in terms of language, actually, the region where I come from in the Philippines. Okay, so the language of the Visayas. Next slide. Okay. One thing, though, about the Cebuano that I am talking about, my language, Cebuano is actually, I've learned recently that's a very much an American colonial term. Uh, so right now, we actually call our language as Binisaya. And actually, if you go to various regions in the Visayas and even in Mindanao, the southernmost island of the Philippines, we have very different kinds of Binisaya. Okay? For example, the people in Cebuano, they call their Binisaya as Binisayang Cebuano. And in Bohol, they call their Binisaya as Binisayang Bolanon. In my island, in my province, we call our Binisaya as Binisayang Binuglas. And in Siquijor, they call their language Binisayang Siquijudnon. We have probably similar grammar, similar words, but for the most part, it's also kind of different. That's why we kind of differentiate the different kinds of Binisaya that we have. Okay, we don't call it Cebuano anymore because for us, that's a very much of an American colonial term, Cebuano. We'd rather call it Binisaya with all of these varieties. Okay? So that's my language, Cebuano, but we prefer calling it Binisaya. Okay? Next slide. Okay. But the thing about, especially from my province, especially in Dumaguete, is that, like I said, we were colonized by the Americans. The biggest university in my hometown is an American university, Silliman University. And from the very beginning, when it was founded in 1901, we were taught to speak in English. Okay? And every time we would speak a word in the local language, we would actually have to pay 5 pesos. I don't know how much that is in euros, but in a sense, that's like you're penalizing the students for speaking their own language. Okay? So we kind of grew up with that particular system, and we kind of privilege English over our language. That is why, for the most part, if you talk about the writers from my city, we really write in English because that's how we were taught. Although these days, we have a lot of writers already writing in our local language, okay? So speak English all of the time, or else you'll be penalized. That was our culture for the longest time, okay? So next slide. And in that, because of that particular culture that we have, speaking in English all of the time, it's actually very difficult to kind of source out, local literature. Growing up in Dumaguete, trying to find literature in my own language, that was actually a very, very difficult task because I couldn't find anything until I found these 2 anthologies from my own hometown. I actually found Priscilla Magdamo Abrahams. She did a collection called The Folk Songs of the Visayas, which she produced in the 1950s. And in the 1980s, Elena Makiso actually came out with a collection of folk tales, short stories that she sourced out from all over the isle, from all over the province of Negros Oriental, and she titled it Ang Sugilanon sa Negros, or the Short Stories of Negros. Okay, so these are some of the older anthologies in my own language coming from my own province of Negros Oriental. Next slide. Okay, but I tried to look for other books that would showcase the writers writing in my own language. Okay, in anthologies, and I couldn't really find anything. The first anthology that tried to actually collect local works in Cebuano or Binisa is actually Bienvenido Lumbera with Philippine Literature, a History and Anthology. And there are some works there in Binisaya, but not from my province. Okay? And then I also look at Isagani R. Cruz in Our Own Words, which is, again, another anthology of works by regional writers. Again, I could not find anybody from my own province. So I started feeling regional literature is already marginalized. And then I kind of discovered that even in that marginalization, there is even further marginalization. Okay? I could not find any representation at all from my own province. Okay? So these are the 2 primary anthologies that I actually sought out a long, long time ago. Next slide, please. Okay? But my Bible, the Bible of regional language literature of the Visayas actually, is merely alunan sa atong dila or in our own tongue. Okay? And this is probably the most comprehensive anthology of poetry, of fiction in all of the languages of the Visayas. And Merly Alunan actually is from Tacloban, but she's also from my own city of Dumaguete. Okay? So I consider this book very, very important. But when I took a look into the book, again, nobody from Negros Oriental. So, Ma'am Merle, where is she? Are you here? Why now? Why nobody from Dumaguete? So again, I tried looking like where is my representation? Where are the writers in the local language from where I come from? So even in this Bible that I really, really respect, I could not find anybody from my own place. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then I decided to go on like my own research. Are there really nobody writing in from my own hometown, from my own province, writing in Binisaya? And I actually found out there are so many, but they have remained unanthologized. They have remained unresearched. They have remained unstudied because for the most part, nobody really knew them. Two writers that I would like to show as an example is actually these two. This is Melanio Relatado and Leonard Visoro. And they actually wrote poems in Binisaya and published them in a magazine called Bisaya Magazine, the primary publication of our literature in our language, Bisaya Magazine. So I actually found poems written by them in that magazine, but they have remained unanthologized, and nobody really knows these people. And I've only started the task of actually interviewing their families to get to know about them more and to probably collect their works so that maybe I can do a future anthology of Binisaya literature coming from my own province. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's what I've been doing in my school. I teach creative writing in Silliman University, and I've actually asked my master's students, you go to the cities and towns all over our province, please collect the poetry or the balak, please collect the Sugilano and the short story, because these people are, well, again, they're not studied. They have remained uncollected. So, for example, this particular student I actually sent her to my hometown, another hometown that I have, Bayawan, and she actually found so many writers, including this particular old man, who actually wrote a kind of literature he called binutbot. Okay, binutbot is kind of like if you translate that, it's called I don't know fantasy making. So
What?
yeah. So he would just recite these stories with an audio embellishments, okay? And she managed actually to interview him and collect his works a few months before he died. So I've been tasking my students to actually try to collect all of this uncollected balak sugilanon from all over my province because I wanted to prove a point that there are actually writers in my own language from my own province, even though in the anthology that I've shown you, they are largely absent. Okay? Next slide. So that's it. So that's what I'm trying to do. So even though I write primarily English, I really find it to be my purpose to try to collect the local literature in my own language from my province because we are not represented at all. And I need to make a point that there exists a literature of our own tongue in my province.
Yes. Ask to Darwin.
I'm going to stab him again.
Oh my gosh.
I'd like to center my short speech in 2 points. How the regional voices was suppressed by the Imperial Manila, which is largely shaped by the colonial policies. And how, on the other hand, the regional voices actually form the most integral part of Philippine heritage and Philippine literature. Up until today in the Philippines, when you read history books, it always begins with the coming of the Spaniards. It was a kind of narrative that was propagated by the Spaniards, which they call the bipartite historical narrative, when they divided the periodization of our history into two. That is before their arrival and beginning with their arrival. And they asserted that before their arrival, the country was in a dark age. And that the beginning of civilization started with their arrival. For a very long time, our people was exposed to that kind of historical narrative. And even until today, there are still many Filipinos who are beholden to that kind of historical narrative. But if you look at the life of Rizal and many other thinkers of the propaganda in the last part of the Spanish Conquest, they tried to interrogate that kind of historical narrative by producing their own native interpretation of history. And as a result, they produced what they call the tripartite historical narrative. Tripartite historical narrative meaning they divided the periodization into three. The first part was before the coming of the Spaniards. What was Philippines then? Although the name Philippines did not yet exist. And then they said, well, the country had a civilization because it interacted with neighboring countries and participated in the international sea trade. The fact that we have balangay boats, that means we had boat building factory in those times. The second part was during the long Spanish evangelization. And in contrast to what the Spaniards have asserted that they brought civilization, Rizal, our national hero, and many other thinkers of the propaganda asserted, in fact, the long Spanish evangelization is the country's dark age because it is the root of the social cancer that manifested at the turn of the 19th century. And the last part, what should be the country after Spanish occupation? Well, they differ. Ilustrados articulated the country to be remain under Spain but free from the grip of the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church was the most brutal and abusive colonial instrument in that particular period of time. For the revolutionaries, they wanted total independence from Spain. That kind of historical narrative has suppressed the importance and contribution of Islamic heritage in the country, which I'm going to show. If you look at this map, this is dated 1200 to 1450. Philippines was already involved in the international sea trade. And this involvement in the international sea trade facilitated these trade routes, facilitated the entry of various civilizations and people of higher civilizations. Those were the Indians and the Chinese, and later on the Muslim traders and preachers. And they all came to trade and brought with them their civilization, their culture, their religion that nurtured the growth of Philippine civilization, which Rizal asserted and lamented to the losing of the ancient nationality in the long Spanish evangelization. When the Spaniards came, in that advocacy of bipartite historical narrative, when they asserted that the country was in a dark age before the coming of the Spaniards, everything we learned in this particular period of time was lost in the consciousness and in the memory of our ancestors. But the most lasting impact that has brought the country its contribution insofar as the building of the Philippine civilization is concerned is Islam. Islam came, next slide please. Islam came to our country beginning in the 12th century. It started in the farthest south and slowly penetrated to the north. Now this map shows what the Philippines looked like before the coming of the Spaniards and the influence of Islam. You can see up until the north, Islam has reached until Ilocos. Panay, we were talking about Panay earlier, was under the Sultanate of Sulu. And Cebu, and the famous Sinulog dance in Cebu is traceable to its origin to be the war dance in Sulu. Unfortunately, as Islam started to spread up north, the Spaniards came, who has a bitter memory with Muslim in Spain when they launched the Reconquest and Inquisition that resulted in the bitter war between the Spanish Muslims and the Christian Muslims. And when they came, when they found the Muslims, the characteristic of Inquisition was revived, and the war was extended to the Philippines. And the Muslims suffered. For more than 300 years, the Muslims fought to protect their religion, to protect their way of life, and successfully managed to remain free and preserve their culture and religion, which is very important in building a very comprehensive and beautiful Philippines past. Now, my next slide will show the influence of Islam, which to many Filipino people remain unknown. Next slide, please. Okay. What are the legacies of Islam, which remain unknown to many Filipino people? There are many words borrowed from Malay, Arabic, and even words from the Muslim South. Say, for example, even the word Simba, which is worship, is derived from Malay Sumba, which the Malay took it from Arabic Sabba. The structure church, its design, its architectural design was inspired by the mosque in Alhambra, which was brought by the Spaniards to the Philippines. The old churches that they constructed in the Philippines, in Bohol and in Cebu, were inspired by the architectural design of the mosque in Alhambra, because Spain was ruled by Muslims for nearly 800 years. The word like hukum, to mean that even the legal system of the Philippines until today has Islamic influence, because hukum is an Arabic word. And a lot more. I can name a lot. I can go on for 1 hour, but we don't have much time. In terms of psychology and spirituality, if you go to Philippines, you would hear from them in their everyday conversation the word po and opo as a sign of respect. Yes po, opo. That words are Malay. That means it was the Malay Muslims who taught them that kind of respect. Now, this is the most important thing. Kapwa, this is now beginning to dominate in the collective consciousness of the Filipino people. This is a very indigenous concept. In the 60s and the 70s and in the 80s, there was a desire to rediscover the original Filipino thoughts, because it doesn't make sense to our nationalist scholars to understand our way of life from the point of view of other people. And we have to dig out our own spirituality, our own psychology. Thus, one of the ideas that came to emerge is the concept of kapwa. And they found out that kapwa, in contrast to what the Western concept defined it, kapwa is a fellow human being that has nothing to do with you. But the original concept of kapwa is an extension of who you are. That means if I look at you, I see myself. And that is the concept of oneness. The origin of kapwa is actually taken from the Islamic concept of oneness, or divine tawhid, which is the central message in Islam. Looking at the entire creation that is embraced in this concept of divine oneness and seeing its connectivity, that there is no such creation in this world exists on its own and operates on its own. Then we have the ginhawa. Ginhawa, as proposed by Leonardo Mercado, should replace the borrowed word espiritu. Ginhawa is taken from Sulu. Even the word saliksik, to research. In Tagalog, when you do saliksik, you do research. Saliksik derived from Arabic salik, which means spiritual seeker. That means in the ancient Filipino concept of research, it was not just merely finding data. It was seeking God. Thank you so much.
We have time for questions, so just raise your hand and a mic will be passed to you. Yes, over there, please.
Are there also, do you know if there might have been more languages that might have died out already?
Dead languages.
We have as many languages as we have the islands, no? And there are only like 7 major languages being legitimized by the government, like for example during the mother tongue based multilingual education, no? And because of that, of course, there are many languages like the Higaunon or the Binukid, no, from the Bukidnon, no, area in the Mindanao. Like for example, when we have the national literary contest, it was very difficult to get entries now from these languages, even if they are given the opportunity. Chabacano, for instance, no. So it still exists, but again, it's not as flourishing in terms of printed literature compared to other languages in the other regions like Binisaya and Tagalog, for instance, no, Ilocano, and even Hiligaynon.
Other questions? Yes.
What does the Philippine government need to do that authors in the Philippines will write more in their regional languages?
I think Jen mentioned a while ago nga, in terms of like trying to make in terms of like trying to improve or maybe these languages, there are actually literary contests that they actually give out specific for for specific for languages. But like what Jen said, there are no entries, so we that's kind of like a tell that there are really no writers yet in those languages, or maybe writers that we don't know about. So I do think the government is trying to do something, but maybe it's not reaching out to the communities that are actually that needs to be reached out to.
If we think about the Philippine literary history, for instance, no, and of course, the 1986 Cory EDSA revolution, no, there was the decentralization of the cultural center of the Philippines, and in 1991, during the Ramos period, there was the establishment of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, that gave writing grants, no, and fellowships to the writers in the region. So there are yearly writing workshops, and that includes different Philippine languages. No? So aside from English and Filipino, we have Cebuano or the Binisaya. No? We have the Hiligaynon. We have writing workshops, no? And the events, no? And right now, the independent publishing is flourishing. In terms of the government, we need more, of course. We need more budget. So, like, for example, I sit in the executive board of the National Commission for the National Committee on Literary Arts. And we have actually the yearly for 4 years now, no, in honor of Dr. Bienvenido Lombera. We call it Gawad Bienvenido Lombera. So it's a national contest, and there are 10 languages in this yearly contest. The some languages are open to new languages, no. So every year. And so this is one opportunity. And of course, there are also grants, no, in terms of publications, in terms of workshops, no, and many other things. Actually, we are. I think, no, I'm quite optimistic. We are because we are. It's just starting, no, and that's why this guesting here, no, being here in Frankfurt is an important milestone and significant. And of course, the government needs to give more budget and support to the writers, the publishers, translators, which we are just starting, no, to be open about it to the world, no, other than English, which also dominated for quite some time. So we have now the German, for instance, no, the Czech, no, so and the Spanish. So yeah, no, so
To continue, actually, the appreciation for this kinds for regional literature is actually, I think, quite recent, 10, 20 years. For example, like the Mambabalak from my own province, they do write in Balak, they do write Sugilan, but when we ask them about like, what the work is all about, they actually thought, oh, I didn't know that my work in my language was actually important, that other people are actually appreciative of it. So they just do the balak to like recite them in the radio. They do the sugilanon, not really for publication, but they enjoy writing in the language. So only the appreciation is only very belated actually. So
For a very long time, like I pointed out earlier, our history is dominated by the history of the center, the Imperial Manila.
You'll be hearing from me in a bit.
It was only like like you said 10, 20 years ago. But in terms of the Muslim history, it was really suppressed. If you read Philippine history books, you only find few pages, and the narrative is very negative, despite of the contribution that I have explained earlier. But there are significant developments in few years back. Say, for example, there was a bill that came that lapsed into law. It's called Integrated History Act, mandating the integration of the history of the Muslims and the Lumad in both secondary and higher education, although it's not yet being implemented because the CHED and DepEd, our education department, don't know what to do about the implementation. So we are helping them. Second, in this administration, I think it was last year when our president issued proclamation order number 10 celebrating Islam in the country. And my presence here also shows the positive development. I call it healing. the Muslim-Christian relationship healing. Maybe 10 years ago, you will not find any Muslim in this kind of any gathering. But now my presence speaks that kind of development, which I am happy and which I see as a contribution to the Muslims' contribution to the nation building.
By default, I am the representative of Imperial Manila. And I have to tell you, it really sucks because it's all black marks going back in history. Everything was centralized. Certain languages like English and Filipino Tagalog, that was privileged. Many works, especially in the South, were suppressed, and all the other languages were considered somehow inferior, not even worth publishing. And that kind of thinking, which is infuriating to me, it permeated generations of thought. This wrongness. But steps have been taken, thankfully, to at least begin to address this terrible, terrible shame. And one of the things, apart from what my colleagues here have said, I am the chair of the Filipino Critics Circle, which used to be called the Manila Critics Circle, and I moved to change that name because it was Manila centric. It's about the Filipinos. It needs to be more inclusive. The Filipino Critics Circle helps administer the National Book Awards, which for the longest time privileged English and Filipino. But in the past decade or so, we have made sure to have categories that highlight specific regional languages. But here is the irony of it all. As you said, there's few. So we open categories for Kiniraya or Iluko or various Waray, other languages, but the submissions are so few because there was never any encouragement. In fact, there was the reverse. So for me, my hope is that it's only a matter of time. As all these programs, these incentives, these awards, this reverse shaming, this step here and decentralizing. And instead of one center, we have multiple centers because we are archipelagic, which means that all the islands in our archipelago are linked together and bound by the sea. So we are just one huge entity, and it has to, and I'm thankful at least it's starting. So our common hope is that the next time you hear from us, you will see more work from more languages translated so you guys can read it as well. Yeah. I feel shame and guilt. Yes, question please. Over there, sir. There's the mic.
Hello, my name is Peter. I'm connected with the Philippines almost more than 50 years.
Oh.
My first wife, and I got in touch with her 1974. And my first trip to the Philippines was 1976 with Sabena Airlines. It never exists anymore. My question, what do you think, how is the impact of German language in the Philippines according to the economy or the political impact to the Philippines or the Philippines to Germany? I know that the ambassador, the lady ambassador in Manila said of the motivation why she is lovely in the Philippines, she said, Mr. Jose Rizal inspired me so much. That's the same to me. So I'm very happy to be here. Almost many books are translated in German, and I love to see it. Thank you. What is, the impact of German language for the Philippines?
We do read German literature, but mostly in English translation. I'm sorry to tell you that. So we are not a German-speaking nation, unfortunately. So yeah, we do read it, but in translation.
There are many
the
people.
Philippines enjoyed the intellectual. We have many intellectuals and scholars in the Philippines who were greatly influenced by German writers and scholars. Franz Kafka, for instance, remained popular in the Philippines and being taught still in the Philippines, but in English translation.
Wolfgang Goethe. of course.
Yeah, yeah.
And Mr. Rizal was in Germany for 2 years, in Heidelberg. I saw his statue there 2 years ago.
In childhood, we recite a poem titled to the Flowers of Heidelberg, which is written by Jose
Mr.
Rizal.
Blumenthal. There is a Blumentritt. There is a street in Manila, I think so.
Yes, it is reflected in our own cultural history. There is Blumentritt. We know of Heidelberg. So a large number of the Filipino delegation who is here is just so excited to go to Heidelberg because we know the poetry. Our national hero lived and breathed this very air. And through his writings, we get to do it as well. And for that, we are thankful to you guys. We are.
My second day here, I went straight to Heidelberg because that's like a must, you know.
Okay, unfortunately, we're almost out of time. So I would like to thank our three panelists and, of course, all of you for sitting here and listening to us. So once again, thank you so much. I hope to see you again. Have a great day.